you in touch with Christians in Syria at all right now?
Yes, I am. And I have lots of Syrians in my parish and Palestinians, and they're both in great sorrow, You know, Syria, when I visited Syria in 2010, I was hosted by a wonderful metropolitan who was in the southern part of Syria. It was just before the civil war broke out, just before the jihadis and ISIS really started ransacking the country. At that time, there were about 20 million Syrians and 2 million were Christians. That's only 10% of the population. But we have ancient culture there, ancient churches that go all the way back to the very beginning of the Christian faith. I traveled in all of the bishoprics of Syria, all the way up to the Turkish border. We even went across the Turkish border into what is ancient Antioch, which is where Christians were first called Christians, right? This is Acts chapter 11. The first place we actually were called Christians was in the greatest of the Roman cities in the east, the place where the emperor had his palace in the east, the place where he would launch all his Persian wars from the east. This was Paul's missionary hub. If you read the Acts of the Apostles, this is the place that he launched his greatest missionary endeavors, his great 4 missionary journeys. That whole area used to be the heartbeat of the Patriarchate of Antioch, one of the 5 great patriarchates, together with Rome, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Antioch. These are like the core of first millennium Christianity. Once the war broke out, Christians have been, what shall I say, brutally decimated. The political power at that time, and for
the war recently, the war,
2011,
and which, just for folks listening, what is that war?
Yeah, this is the outbreak of what we would know as the successors to Al Qaeda, what are called ISIS. These are Sunni jihadis who view the murder of Christians who resist conversion to Islam as an imperative.
I think there's a lot of people who look at the Middle East and they just see constant, from their Western vantage point, maybe American vantage point, maybe constant turmoil, dictators that get deposed, new regimes that come to power, warring in between sects of Islam, radical Islamists, ISIS, Al Qaeda, emerging, different sects fighting, and then there's Christians who are kind of caught up in the middle of the firestorm.
Islam is the most disruptive historical development in the history of Christianity. Muhammad was born in 570 in what is now Saudi Arabia. And by the time he finished, by 630 or so, he had led 25 raids against Jewish and Christian tribes, unprovoked. He established a worldview in Islam that divides the whole world into 2. We do this too as Christians, right? We view the whole world in 2 parts. The area that has been evangelized, that has heard the good news and has had an opportunity to believe in Jesus and to enter into the kingdom of God, and those parts of the world that have not yet been evangelized. For us, that's how Christians are always looking at it. Islam views the world in 2 parts, what they call the House of Islam. The House of Islam is where not just there are predominance of Muslims, but where Sharia or Muslim law is in force. If it's not enforced, there may be a majority of Muslims, but they don't consider that truly the House of Islam. The rest of the world, you know what they call the rest of the world? The House of War. That's how a Muslim divides. That's the Quran. So you can imagine what that means for Christians, what that means for Christians and has meant for Christians since 634, when the Muslims came into Jerusalem and then into Damascus and then into all of our major cities in North Africa, and then started their jihad across the Mediterranean Sea, coming into the southern parts of France and Spain. What that has meant for us is several things. One, if you want to maintain your freedom, you want to maintain your rights, you have to convert to Islam. If you do that as a Christian, you've lost your soul. You've betrayed God. You've become what the church calls an apostate. God forbid. Most of our people didn't do that. Some did. You
mean you're saying historically, or you're saying recently?
I'm saying since the 7th century.
Since the 7th century.
Until today.
Until today, right.
Absolutely until today. This is Islam. It's not a type of Islam.
It's the idea of this, how did the early church win souls? Martyrdom and poverty, as you say, and the influence and love, of course.
Absolutely.
And then how did Islam win its first
Jesus
conquest?
said, no greater witness do we have, no greater potency than this, that we love one another. He said, by this, all men will know that you're my disciples. What's the ultimate apologetic? If you love one another the way I loved you. This is how we won the world.
Catholics and Orthodox have to get together, but that's a whole other. We do love each other, of course.
Yes, I think we do.
We do, of course.
I think
but
we
with
do.
Islam, it was a religion with its early, centuries marked in violence to conquer.
There are over, Lila, there's 100 in my count. I used to teach a class at the local Christian university called Cal Baptist in my town, called The Cross and the Crescent, the history of Christian-Muslim relations. When I was teaching that class, I read through the Quran many times in preparation for class. And I noted how many direct commands to violence Muhammad gave. My count, 123. 123 explicit commands to do violence to those who resisted the advance of Islam, and particularly to Christians, including details on how to kill us. Stab them in the neck. I mean, this is one of his commands. It's not a coincidence that many people, for instance, in England, who have suffered Islamic violence, have been stabbed in the neck. People go, oh, they got stabbed in the neck because the person was crazy. Actually, he was just following Muhammad's commandments.
What do you make of moderate Muslims? Because obviously, we had Bill Asaley on the show recently. He's a California assemblyman. He's not Riverside County, he's adjacent, but really solid guy. He's quoting Mother Teresa, in our interview. Good man, and he's fighting for pro-life. He's fighting for marriage.
Sure.
And, here he is born and raised a Muslim. And still, I don't get into the details of his faith practice, but you have a lot of Muslims like this who, or a country like Jordan, where you presumably have, Muslims, Christians, Jewish people, or Israel, Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people living together in largely harmony. Obviously, there can be some friction around the edges.
I'm not sure I would describe the coexistence of Christians, Muslims, and Jews in the Middle East as largely in harmony.
I'm playing a devil's advocate to say in some cultures it seems that there can be, we had a Muslim here to kind of say, hey, I'm a moderate Muslim.
The majority, there are forms
violence.
of Muslims, right? The majority are the Sunni, and the Sunni have given us the hardest time. So I mentioned traveling in Syria in 2010. 2011, the war broke out. And now we don't have 2 million Christians in Syria anymore. Maybe we have 300,000 or 400,000.
Incredible. Yeah. There used to be how many?
2 million.
2 million Christians in Syria.
That was just in 2010. There used to be a lot more than that.
2010.
2010.
And now it's down to a few hundred thousand.
Vast majority are gone. Absolutely.
And they've fled or they've been killed?
Both.